AI is not new. We've been using AI for years. And I think what's different now is in the past where I would have teams of data scientists working on machine learning models. Now we have generative AI, which effectively has put a human-like interface onto it, which not only means we can make it appear to be human if we want to use it in chatbots, but it means that when we're asking things of technology, we can do that in a human way. So it's democratized effectively what we were all doing before with big teams of data scientists, but now we've kind of given that power to everybody. But there's a real challenge. You've got to get past the hype. You'll have a lot of people, whether it's your executives, whether it's your board, that will be kind of hearing stories, whichever business has optimized its workforce by X% or saved X amount of money, and educate them that it's not a magic bullet.
Welcome to the Issuer Academy, Paymentology's podcast to innovate, scale, and provide impact. I'm your host, Merusha Naidu. If you're a fintech professional, banking leader, or an innovator in the digital payment space, you're in the right place. Here, we deep dive into the challenges and triumphs of launching next-generation card programs, from virtual cards and digital wallets to cross-border FX solutions. Let's get started. Welcome to a very special live edition of the Issuer Academy, coming to you from the buzzing floors of Money 2020 Europe, here in Amsterdam. I'm your host, Merusha Naidu, and today we're diving into one of the hottest topics in fintech right now, AI in payments. In the AI Stampede, who's stopping to ask the right questions? I heard a phrase recently that really stuck with me. AI without aim is money down the drain. And that's so true. In a race to automate, optimize, and innovate, are we pausing long enough to define the real value that we are trying to unlock? Joining me are two people with their feet in both the future and the foundations. Firstly, we have Theodora Lau, founder of Unconventional Ventures and author of Banking of Artificial Intelligence, which she's actually signing right here at the event. And our very own Tim Joslyn, Chief Technology Officer at Paymentology. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's get straight into it. The AI rush and what is driving it. AI has moved from theory to action across financial services. And while that's exciting, it's also a moment that calls for reflection. Adoption is accelerating, but so are the questions that we should be asking. Theo, what do you think is unique about this moment in AI? Is it the technology, the timing, or the expectations?
I love how you phrase the questions we should be asking.
Yes.
Because I think even from this morning at the beginning of Money 2020 for the last, I'd say 2 hours, I lost count of how many times we say the word AI.
Yes.
AI is everywhere and anywhere. But is it truly what we're supposed to be doing? Is it fit for purpose? Is the question I often ask. I think what's different with this particular cycle, because we've seen through multiple of these iterations already, but what's different about this time around is thanks to OpenAI and ChatGPT back in late 2022, people now can have access to the technology. They can play with it. They can see it. We've seen so many action figures, if you will, right, on social media. We've seen videos that people create. We've seen marketing PRs that have been written by AI. So that's the difference this time around, is you can actually use it and play with it and see the outcome of it. On the flip side of it, though, we've also seen a lot of news around chatbots gone rogue, generating stuff that they're not supposed to be saying. We've seen scams on the rise, bad actors using AI to defraud people. So it's always a balance of where are we using technology. But in the end, I always go back to all of these things are interesting. It's fun, but is it really creating value for our ecosystem? Can we move beyond the low-hanging fruit? And can we move beyond just saying, oh, we are increasing operational efficiency, AKA, you don't need as many people, or we're laying off people, using AI as an excuse.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also, we're scratching the surface, but nobody's really gone deep enough to say, we're talking about optimization, we're talking about efficiency. How, right? And that's really the question. And maybe, Tim, from your perspective at Paymentology, how do you keep innovation focused and grounded and avoid falling into the trap of implementing tech just because it's available?
No, I think that's a good question. And I think, as just been sort of previously discussed, AI is not new. We've been using AI for years. And I think what's different now is in the past where I would have teams of data scientists working on machine learning models, now we have generative AI, which effectively has put a human-like interface onto it, which not only means we can make it appear to be human if we want to use it in chatbots, but it means that when we're asking things of technology, we can do that in a human way. So it's democratized effectively what we were all doing before with big teams of data scientists, but now we've kind of given that power to everybody. But there's a real kind of challenge, I think, and I look at it from a CTO perspective, and I think all CTOs will have this everywhere, is you've got to get past the hype. You'll have a lot of people, whether it's your executives, whether it's your board, that will be kind of hearing stories, whichever business has optimized its workforce by X% or saved X amount of money, and educate them that it's not a magic bullet. You don't want to get into a risk of kind of implementing tech for tech's sake. So you still need to come back to the fundamentals, is what is the value that we are trying to create? And if you can't articulate that, then actually you're probably using AI for the wrong reasons. My suggestion and what we've done, and I'll talk about a bit later, is start with productivity, learn what can be done with AI, because I think any of us kind of sit here and go, this is how we can use generative AI, this is what we can do. We're only looking at it from our own perspective. I even know with my children, they use ChatGPT in a completely different way to how I would use it. So actually, if you can give as much AI tools to different people in the business and see how they use it, then the use cases will come out of it. But start from that perspective, rather than starting with the technology and looking for a sort of a problem to solve.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I recently just had a conversation with a financial institution, right? Their first question is, we need to present something to the board. What technology can we use? What can we put in there? I'm like, no, wait, hang on. Do you even know what things you're trying to do? What are your problems, that you want to improve on? A lot of people say, we just want to see what we can throw in there. And that is precisely to your point, Tim, is using tech for tech's sake. If you're a smaller institution, are you trying to get more deposits? Look at that from a use case. Or, do you have efficiency problem and you're trying to see what you can do in the call center? That's another one. So piecemeal,
Yes.
right? And start small.
Identifying the problem that you're trying to solve first. Because if you understand your problems, then you know how to use AI in the most effective way possible.
I mean, what I would say is AI makes it very much easier to experiment. So you can run very small experiments very, very quickly. So you don't have to go into something with here is a kind of 12-month business case of what we're going to spend and what we're going to get back. You can run something very, very quickly just to kind of see what's going to happen. I think with those, it pays off to make more leaps of faith. So to kind of say, look, okay, we're going to spend an X amount of money. I can't quantify the return, but I think I'm going to get it back through these experiments. But again, start with what is the problem you're trying to solve.
Absolutely. And I think if there's one thing that we leave the listeners with today is identify the problem that you are trying to solve.
Not a Jerry Maguire thing.
Exactly. Actually, read this in your book, I think it was. And it was really about saying, show me the money, but how? Why? Ask more questions and better questions.
I literally heard in the airport, I was walking down and a guy, he was on a conference call, he was on speaker, and he said, get me some of the Gen AI. And I turned and looked at him like, okay, dude, my friend.
And do you even know what that means? You're saying AI, get me AI. In what version? For what purpose? For what, right?
And I think that comes back to one of my original points is there are companies everywhere where technology teams are coming in to sort of work on a Monday morning, and then that's what they're being faced with by whoever's sort of directing them, is how is AI going to kind of fix this business?
And on that point, when we look at cutting through the buzz, what's real versus what is useful? With so much noise around AI, it's easy to lose sight of what's actually useful. It's being talked about everywhere. I mean, even Theodora at the airport, right? So you see in the narrative around AI evolve, what's actually working in financial services and what's just noise?
There's a lot of noise. There's no doubt a lot of noise. To Tim's point, we've been using AI for quite a few years in financial services, and there are some success stories. So starting with problem to be solved. So for example, loan origination process you have stacks and stacks and stacks of paperwork. How can we make the process more efficient? And that's, one good use case of AI, using technology to basically go through all of the documents that you need, having the technology to interact with these either small business owners or the consumers coming in to try to get a loan, helping them through the cycle so they know what information they need to have, going through what they submit. So that whole process reduces hours of manual work that, normal loan officers need to go. And to the point where you have a loan origination file that's ready to be approved, and just using the human at that point to verify and validate and approve. That's a great use case to use AI and AI agents for. It's not just improving efficiency of your own processes, but also helping the other end user out. Because a lot of people have gone through applying for mortgages, applying for loans. It's a painful process. It's a waste of time, right? I want something to make it faster. You already know so much about me. Another great use case I love is actually this was in the one and only Money 2020 Asia that was in Hangzhou quite a few years ago. And we did a visit with Alipay. And at that time, they were showing us the 310. So 3 minutes to basically get all your information, assess you as a consumer or a small business owner, 1 second to get you the money on your app, 0 human interaction. That is a brilliant use case of using technology because they already have all of the data points. I know who you are. I know exactly how much your risk profile is. And here you go.
And I think that's one thing that's so exciting about Alipay, right? They're not afraid to say, look, let's try something. And they really go all in. And one thing that we've seen is so many of their initiatives using AI has actually brought in financial inclusion aspects and it's brought the customer closer to the heart of what they're trying to do as a business, which is solve everyday pain points and financial problems for consumers on the ground.
Exactly what you said. We always go back to what's your cousin debt. We love to say, oh, you can open your bank account much faster with the app. Okay, so instead of, 20 clicks, you get it through 6 clicks. So what? As a consumer, my goal is not to open a bank account. My goal is to get access to credit. My goal is to find a way to save money. My goal is from X to Y. That's my goal, not opening a bank account. I don't count that as my goal. So help me get to my endpoint much faster and easier and deliver value to me as an end user.
This is interesting as well, where you see different businesses able to move at different speeds, and not necessarily because of a different access to technology, but because of different regulatory environments. So, for example, if you try to do something around kind of account opening or eligibility for a loan product, for example, in Europe, you have to be very, very careful that you're able to prove that there was no bias throughout the process. And you have to be able to, if you want to, go back and show that every step was audited as to why certain decisions were made, which can make it challenging to suddenly start to bring in things like AI, depending how you're using it, into those processes. In other countries, there may not be quite so much regulation. So actually you start to see these products come out, which can offer a much better user experience.
And that's actually what we're seeing across different parts of APAC, the Middle East, even in Latin America, where the regulations haven't caught up, but it does give financial institutions that kind of flexibility to say, let's try something, let's push the boundaries a little bit more, and then get the regulators to see the value and then regulate. And so that is quite interesting. Whereas if we see in Europe and more Western markets, there is a slight aversion to be that open to AI, right? There's still a lot of nervousness around it. They're still very, very cautious around how they use it. But the customer way of thinking is also very different.
It is interesting. So earlier in the year, there was a Alderman Trust Barometer report. I hope I got the name right. But it's basically an annual report that they release every year about consumer trust in certain areas. And this particular one, I couldn't quite solve it. It talked about the different regions and consumers' perception of the use of AI in business and to gauge different countries and how much they trust that. In the US, I think they say it's only about 30% of consumers trust the use of AI in business. Whereas in India, in China, in Indonesia, and also some regions in Africa, the number is as high up as 70%. So it's huge. Exactly, right? You would thought because, some parts of the world have more access to the technology and, we have a chance to play with it, that we'll trust it more, but that's actually inverse. So that was fascinating. Only 1 in 3 in countries like the UK and US actually trust the use of the technology. Now, one of the hypotheses people are saying is perhaps in some of the other regions, they are so used to seeing it in their daily lives, right? Talking about this perhaps, and not just in Asia, but also now in LATAM, right? There's more and more use of the technology in their day-to-day lives that they just got used to it. Whereas I think, in certain parts of the country, regulation, Tim, you touched on that, but also we had certain ways of using things that I guess we just got used to it. I don't know.
When you look at emerging markets, they often leapfrog through technology because they're just moving at a really rapid pace, right? Customers want more diversity, they want more access, they want it right now. There's a real need for 24/7, 365. And so we're seeing that happen a lot in APAC, a lot. India is an excellent example of how technology is just moving at an extremely fast pace. But Tim, looking at Paymentology, you operate across UK, Europe, Middle East, Africa, LAC, APAC. What practical behind the scenes use cases are already driving value at Paymentology or for your customers?
So as mentioned before, we started very much from a productivity point of view. So how do we make everybody kind of, more effective? So from an engineering point of view, we've got, just over 200 people in our technology organization. Everybody has access to Copilot and or Cursor if they want to use that. We've seen massive improvements in terms of automating the writing of test cases, rewriting legacy code. There's been a lot of real kind of things that you can just obviously go, that has been much, much quicker because we've used AI. Also from an engineering perspective, we measure the amount of AI that's being used. If a team needs more headcount, that doesn't get approved unless they can show good use of AI to start with. Because I don't believe there is a single engineer who cannot make themselves more effective through AI, because there's lots of stuff you're just doing on a daily basis, which is repetitive. Doesn't mean you should rely on it 100%, but you can definitely accelerate what you're doing. I think the other thing for a business like ours is our knowledge across the organization is spread in many, many different places. We have so much kind of company knowledge in Slack, in Confluence, in Zendesk. We now have an internal agent that we use to bring all that knowledge together. So effectively, we have anybody in the organization, whether you're on our support teams, whether you're working on the sales side, you can ask any questions to what effectively is a chat interface, and it will bring back knowledge from across those different places. So that's been hugely positive, particularly from a customer support perspective, where they can just get answers without having to sort of escalate to other people. Everybody in the organization has access to ChatGPT. We're an enterprise user of that. That comes back to, again, what I said earlier, in that there's no point me or anybody else in kind of the management team trying to work out how we should use AI. It's better to give everybody access to AI and then see, what are the use cases that are coming back and what are the ideas. Starting to run things like internal AI hackathons. Again, with that, we're trying to make sure that we include everybody, because AI has democratized the access to technology. We don't have to just have engineers getting involved in hackathons. We can get anybody in the business. And that's to surface, again, ideas that we won't have thought of. So I think for us, it's very much just a focus on how you make AI as a tool, as part of your everyday life, and how you make somebody more efficient. There's different things that we do look at. We've always used AI from a fraud perspective. There's things like chargeback processing is somewhere where just very simple things. It's not necessarily about making a decision about how a chargeback should be submitted, but because we operate in a global economy, some of our chargebacks come in one language, but we need to submit them to a scheme in a different language. So again, it's sort of very simple. What were before manual, monotonous tasks, how do we get those automated and allow people to do things which are higher value?
And what I'm hearing is intentional optimization. And I think that is what is key, right? You're not just saying, okay, let's just try everything. It's like, okay, saying specifically for your engineering team. Firstly, it's quite incredible the fact that you are not allowing your team to employ more people until they're actually shown a good use of AI. And that's so incredibly important, because that really does cut out things like human error. But it's all about balance. You're still relying on your engineers, but you're giving them the tools to say, how do I make sure that what I'm actually putting out is efficient, correct, and now flowing through all of your processes? That's amazing. One of the other things that I want to touch on that you've just spoken about is your internal ChatGPT. A lot of companies in today's world are nervous about giving the employees full access to ChatGPT. Tim, you guys have done it. What positive outcomes have you seen so far?
I think the interesting thing is actually, I couldn't tell you what all of the outcomes are, because if I look at the admin interface to that, I can see there's tens of thousands of conversations happening on a daily basis. I have no idea what they are, and I don't want to know what they are, but the fact is people are using it, and they're using it extensively. So I think there's a lot of, things where just people are they're becoming more productive in their daily role, and you can't necessarily see it or measure it, but you're just getting that kind of productivity gains. Then there's the obvious stuff, summarization of documents, read this for me, give me a view on this. What are the 3 key points I can take from here? So I think there's, definitely, even from myself, from if I look at the non-technical aspects of my role, there's just things which have just been made easier. And that's what I suspect everyone else is kind of doing at the same time.
Yeah, I must say, one of the things that I've seen, which I was mind blown, is one of our product engineers said, okay, well, there's a scheme document, which is about 3,000 pages long. Put it into ChatGPT and says, summarize, give me the main points. Came out to 2 pages. And I was like, this is revolutionizing how we take in data and actually understand the important things that we need to know as a business. And so I was just like, okay, how do we do this with every single scheme, like document, manual? Because it's incredible. Now I want to touch on clarity of purpose, because I think we've been talking around purpose quite a lot. But the question is, what are we actually solving for? Technology works best when it is in service of a clear goal. But with AI, it can be easy to jump ahead without first asking, what are we trying to change? Because without direction, even the smartest tools can miss the mark. Tim, when a fintech or bank says we need to use AI, what's the first question you think that they should actually be asking instead?
I think we've been talking about it already. It's don't decide you want to use or need to use AI. Decide what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
Then understand, can AI help you do that? Don't put the cart before the horse. Actually understand what is it you're trying to do from a value proposition, or what is the operational efficiency that you're trying to generate? And then understand, is there something in AI suite of technologies that are available that can help you do it? I think you also need to then understand as well, I think particularly from a banking point of view, it's not just about how you are going to use AI, but it's how AI is actually going to impact your business as well. So I think we've seen lots of stuff that's starting to arise, things like agentic AI being used for shopping agents. That's going to bring in different types of fraud, that banks and issuers are going to have to be able to respond to. We've already seen the rise of deepfakes, when people are trying to pretend they're the bank and asking you for your PIN codes or for your account details. Again, I think that's something which banks are very much going to have to think about. How do they gear themselves up for, and how do they make sure that when those things start happening to them, how are they going to respond? So I think it's interesting from, particularly from a financial services, particularly from a bank point of view. As I say, they need to remain core to what is it we're trying to achieve, and therefore how does it help? But also don't lose sight of that. What's happening in on the landscape, and how is that going to impact our business?
The thing I'll add to that is, who are you solving it for, right? So what is the business case? Definitely, what are we trying to solve instead of spraying it with AI? But who are you solving for? The small business owners, that's one thing. Tim, when you were talking about intake and output, different languages, that's a great use case. So there's a group of credit unions actually in Eastern Europe that I cited in my book also, is the clientele, the audience that they have. They use different languages that are not Western language based. And so for them, their problem to solve for and who they solve for are people who don't use the tools that we use all the time. And so they have to work towards creating a different model that use Eastern European language and create a tool that they can use for themselves. So when you extend that beyond Eastern Europe, the use case is massive. You talk about, for example, India, different dialects. You talk about Chinese, even Chinese languages have different ways of speaking. Eastern Asia, I heard from a client of mine that they were having a hard time creating similar tools for the Japanese market because it depends on the context. You write from left to right to left, top to bottom. You use different scripts. There are 3 different types. Depends on what are you trying to say. And I see that from time to time. So then the question when you think about who to solve for becomes, who will pay for this? In India, the Indian government has initiated a scheme to try to create something for their massive base of languages. But what about LATAM? What about Africa? There are over 1 billion people in the continent in Africa. But if you look at the top 35 languages that are on the internet, none are African language. And so the question goes to, okay, so if that is the feature of where our bank customers will be, if that is the future we're thinking about everyone using mobile phone, how do we create a world that they are already included in it, that they can be included in it?
It's actually different kinds of inclusion, right? We'll all talk about financial inclusion, but what about making sure that we're educating customers with the same level of inclusion and making sure that everybody is actually a part of that educational piece as well?
Education is culture. There's no financial inclusion, true financial inclusion without inclusion.
Agreed. The other thing is, we're just talking about language, which is very basic, right? That's scratching the surface. When you take it a couple of layers down, you look at things like different demographics, as in age, sex, different categories, and how you actually speak to your different customer segments. Things like when you are dealing with a millennial, they want more information. Speak to the younger generation, they just want quick, easy, bite-size, done. And so you can also use AI in those ways. But the question is, how do we get there? And which of the financial institutions are actually looking at this to say, how do I really deep dive into the who is my customer? And that's the level I think that we need to start getting into, going much deeper into AI.
I think it's also a question of how we think about banking and movement of money. I'm going to use an example quite a few years ago when I was looking at how can we create more products for sandwich generations, for caretakers of families? How can we rethink money, not as a person, but as a family, as generations? And I approached one of the fairly prominent fintech startup and I said, hey, you guys have this solution for roommates, housemates to share rent for the apartment. Can we extend that to family? Can we extend it to, for example, adult children sharing expenses to take care of your parents? Within, I'd say, less than a minute, they listened and they said, we don't do old people. Oh, that was literally their response. We do not do old people. I was shocked. I'm like, okay. And I think there's still a fair bit of that. We want to target this to millennia. We want to target this to Gen Z. We forget the fact that they have many facets of their life and they do evolve. We tend to think of banking for an age group. We forgot the fact that there's life stages. We forget that me, as a almost 52-year-old, live life fairly differently, probably to another 50-year-old down the street living from me. We all have different circumstances. We have different stages. We have different experiences. So to your point, how do we use AI to basically understand the data around us and create solutions that's fit for purpose for who I am at this stage in life and helping me project 10 years forward? Can you evolve with me? I think that's where the premise can be.
I think that's interesting as well, because I think we've always assumed that you need to, as the startup you're talking to, that you have different financial products for different generations and different age groups. The reality is probably a lot of that is just how you communicate with people and how you position. So actually, if you can use things like AI to help you hyper-personalize products for different demographics, then actually there's a lot of efficiency to be had in terms of just having single financial products on the back end, but actually having them appear as multiple things at the front.
Absolutely. There's imagination.
Exactly. Theo, when you see AI being used and implemented with real purpose, what does it look like in practice? And what are the signs that a company has its priorities straight? Because that's something that is key. How do you say, yes, they're actually using it correctly?
Oh, that is $1 billion question. I think it goes back to the why. It goes back to why you're doing what you're doing. That's the approach I often take. Doesn't matter if it's a founder of a small company or, someone from a bigger company. I often ask, why are you doing what you're doing? Are you doing it from efficiency purpose? Okay, and then what? We like to say it can reduce our staff by 50%. And then the question is, okay, what are you going to do with the people that you no longer need? What's the plan after? It's great. That is a great first step. But we need to show people what is the path forward. If we can do that, I think that's a great approach to technology. Same thing as, what I was talking about before. You are not targeting just a very specific segment. Think about how else you can repurpose the technology for greater good, social good, and exactly are you moving the economy forward? Because in fintech, we like to talk about, we are not banks. We do things differently. But are you? Or are you just repackaging in a different way?
Yeah.
So the loan originating process that I was mentioning earlier is with Intuitech. That's here. I'm doing the book signing. Or the 310 with Ant. Or Nubank. Nubank, they had a great feature lately. I think it's been rolled out for a couple of months now. That's targeting the 18 under. And basically, how do we get the younger generation better attuned to using technology, but using technology in a more responsible way, right? And how can we inject and include parents in there so we can teach them at younger age, this is your financial responsibility, but you're also part of a shared finance within the family. So they stress a lot about making financial decisions and taking financial responsibility as a family instead of just one person. And they say it worked well with their particular target audience. So the question is, can we extend that further to different demographics? And I think those are good examples of how we're using technology.
And I think the other thing is looking at, firstly, a personalized solution for yourself, then looking wider at your family situation, which again, everyone is different. Then looking broader to your community, your areas. That circle just grows and grows. But if you're doing it with the right purpose in mind, if you really understand what you're trying to solve for, that becomes easier to incorporate all of those wider circles, right?
Community.
Exactly. Community. So important. So what I want to touch on now is everyone's doing it. So how do I stand out? And I mean, here at Money 2020, we've seen it already. We're just walking through nearly every single stand mentions AI. As AI becomes a part of the standard toolkit, the question isn't just who's using it, but who's using it in ways that are truly reflect their values, their customers, and their ambitions. Tim, from a technology and infrastructure perspective, how can companies stand out when everyone's using the same buzzwords?
My honest answer is please don't try to. I think we've reached, particularly from a technology perspective, we've reached a moment of pretty near ubiquity. You don't sell a house in Europe and kind of like highlight the fact it's got electricity, and you didn't create a company in 2005 and shout about the fact you're using the internet. So I don't think, there's a need now to start shouting about the fact that you're using AI in some way. There were, don't be a victim of FOMO. There were so many companies that particularly when ChatGPT first came out, that came out with their own kind of chat interfaces. And for some of them, we've seen like the horror stories of, when agents go wrong. For others, actually, the agents were fairly useless and you got better responses if you just went and used ChatGPT in the first place. So yeah, I think create the best products and the best propositions and the customer value that you're trying to create. Use AI in doing that. And if that's part of your product, great. If it's not and it's part of your productivity and how you create that product, then fantastic. But you don't need to shout about it. It's just expected.
Absolutely. The proof is in the pudding. You'll see the actual outcomes based on higher customer retention, more engaged customers with regards to actually giving you feedback, which is something that we've seen quite a bit.
Exactly. I mean, if you have a super smooth, simple onboarding process to some financial product, do you care whether that's been done by a human, a computer, or something in between?
Exactly. And actually, onboarding is one of the most efficient ways that we've seen AI being used, where it's really just about sharing knowledge with newcomers. And that pace at which they actually get to a higher level of understanding using AI and asking the right questions is one area that I've seen that has really made an impact, especially at Paymentology, where we do have newcomers asking really, like I always say, there's no such thing as a dumb question. Now you're asking our internal chat GPT, and it's like, okay, but this is also very specific Paymentology answers, which is fantastic. That's exactly what they need. I really love that. Theo, what's your take on brand emotion and trust as differentiators in a world where tech is starting to feel commoditized?
I think that needs to be the foundation of everything we do, don't we? Because at the end of the day, when I deposit money in a particular institution, doesn't matter if it's a fintech startup or incumbent, I trust that my money is safe. When I move it from point A to point B, I trust that it will actually go from point A to point B. So it really doesn't matter if we're using AI, we're not using AI, what are we doing? The foundation of financial services is trust. And trust, the money is emotional. I earn money so that I can go on vacation. I earn money so I can put the kids through college. Every of those decisions is emotional. So trust and emotion needs to be the foundation of everything that we do. So the question is, how can we use technology in a way that is transparent, that is trustworthy, that we know, and Tim, earlier you talk about bias, right? That we know that is going to work for us. And how do you prove that?
And I mean, you're absolutely right. The human side, the emotion, trust, and AI, right? From a consumer perspective, we're talking about people's money. There is emotion, there's trust, there's fear, and in some cases, even shame, because teams build products with pride and conviction and care. And when AI starts taking over part of that decision-making or optimization, can it feel like a loss of ownership or identity? Theo, can AI truly engage with the emotional side of money, or is that a boundary that we still need to be more conscious of?
I think it's a boundary, and it goes back to what are we trying to solve? Ideally, if you ask me, I would love for us to get to a point in technology where it's like navigation, right? When you're using a map, you hop in a car, you say, hey, I want direction to go from my hotel to REI. Should be that, and you trust that, and it says, well, this way it will go faster. If you want to go this way, it's cheaper. It gives you options, and you follow. And when situations change from point A to point B, it will show you what are the different options you can take. I would love for personal finance and financial planning to get to that stage where I am right now to where I need to be in hopefully 10 years when I need to put my kids through college and my parents will be almost 90 and I should really think about retiring. What should I be doing now to where I need to be? How can you help me understanding everything around me and help me get from A to B? To be able to get there, we need trust. We need to know that technology is going to work for us, and we need to trust it enough to give it enough information to work for that. So it's a whole lot of beyond data. How can we use the algorithm to optimize our experience and our pathway? It's a lot of work, but I would love for us to get there.
I think something that you've touched on is so important, sharing the right level of information, because asking the right questions is so, so important, right? And we've got to trust that the information that we are sharing with AI is actually going to be used in a way that benefits our whole lives, right? Through all of the different stages of it. Tim, looking at it from a technical aspect, how do you balance technical optimization with emotional nuance? And how do you manage internal resistance when AI reshapes products people have really poured their hearts and souls into?
Well, you're using AI to replace boring, repetitive processes. No one has any challenges. I think where people respond is where you have some of the kind of the more recent, we're never going to need engineers in 3 years' time. The reality is, my opinion right now is I think AI needs humans. I think of AI, it's a way of giving us kind of superpowers, but it doesn't replace us right now. And I think, I tend to think of particularly generative AI. I think of, it's a group of kind of adolescent children. They've got fantastic insights, but you don't leave them alone to do their own thing for too long. Otherwise, you end up in a Lord of the Flies situation.
That is so true. Theo, would you like to add to that?
Just thinking about my teenagers, you're absolutely right. I do not leave them alone for too long. But I like what you just said, though. Are we going to get to a stage where we just all going to sit back and not have to worry and have agents do everything for us? I don't think so. Right? You and I talked about that before the recording. And what's the joy in it? The three of us are sitting in here in an absolutely hot and transparent glass room. But we're having fun talking. I wouldn't want to replace this with a bot.
Agree.
Right? I don't want to be sitting outside and listening to a bot talking. I want to be in here in a sauna, but it's fun sauna. So it goes back to, what can we use AI or technology, any technology, to help us remove the boring bits of our lives and make things a little faster so we can do something else and hopefully use it for better reasons.
Fully agree. So unfortunately, we've come to the final question. We've covered a lot today. But as we wrap up, let's bring it home with something simple and powerful. I'm going to give you each a sentence, and I'd love for each of you to finish it in your own words. No overthinking, just instinct. The one thing I wish more people understood about AI in financial services is, Theo, over to you first.
It's not magic.
It's not magic. Oh, I love that.
You've just taken mine.
Oh,
Not magical?
Yeah.
So it's not the golden ticket, Tim?
I was going to say it's not the utopian answer.
And I would say it requires work. You've got to put in the work. You've got to ask the right questions. You've got to be open to say, let's pivot, let's try something different. But use AI with intention. Find out what the problem is, figure out the who, figure out the why, and then look at how you use it in an intentional way.
Intention was my second choice. Sorry. I should have done that.
There you go.
It's magic.
And that's a wrap on this special live episode of the Issuer Academy. A huge thank you to Theo and to Tim for helping us pause and reflect. And most of all, for reminding us that better questions lead to better outcomes. Catch you next time on the Issuer Academy. That wraps up today's episode of the Issuer Academy, Paymentology's podcast to innovate, scale, and provide impact. I hope you're leaving with fresh insights and actionable strategies to help you revolutionize your card programs and drive true impact in the world. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please leave a review to help us reach more pioneers like you. Also, be sure to subscribe and follow us for more inspiring episodes and behind-the-scenes content from Paymentology. Until next time, I'm Merusha Naidu. Keep innovating, keep scaling, and keep striving to make an impact.